part of the Earglue Media family of podcasts.
You're listening to Petticoats and Poppies.
History Girls at the Movies.
Welcome to Petticoats and Poppies, History Girls at the Movies. We're your hosts, Maggie and
Nicole. Welcome to our 12th episode, where we will be talking about the 1998 movie, The Mask of Zorro.
Today we are so excited to be joined by a very special guest. She's a screenwriter, host, producer, lover of shiny swords, and glorified space pirate queen. It's the one, the only, Catrina Dennis.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Yes, I'm so excited to be here. I'm very excited to talk about this movie. It's one of my favorite genres, and so I'm super excited to be here talking about it with you guys.
Excellent.
We're so excited to have you on, and we're really excited to be doing a little, Maggie and I have been calling it a Friendsgiving theme, having some people onto the show in the month of, November. We're gonna have some holiday content in December, so we're thinking, what theme could we do in November, because we had our spooky Halloween content in October, and we thought, how about we just host Friendsgiving on the podcast?
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, so it's super exciting to do this, so we can't wait to dive into things.
Yes, absolutely.
But first, we have a couple of questions for you, Catrina, so that, the listeners can get to know you a bit. And the first one is just, what is a topic in history that you're interested in? Could be something that you were always interested in school, or just something that you think is really interesting now.
So this one was actually pretty tough for me because I am the child of a history teacher. So I grew up with not only just, actual nonfiction history, but a lot of historical and period dramas were part of what I grew up watching. So storytelling and history have always kind of been the same thing for me, because history is a story. So I'm interested in everything from ancient Rome's to the hieroglyphs of Egypt to the stories left behind by South American cultures like the Incans, and the way that all of that kind of relates to how quickly we've evolved as a culture over the last, 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if I had to pick an era to travel to and explore, I'd be super honest and say that it's the 70s because it looked like a lot of fun, and I kind of feel like I could survive anything right now. So just weirdly, and I also I'm really excited because I feel very Californian today. So I would want to first transfer back to California in the 1970s.
Ooh.
Yeah. But we are talking about California in a different era. Today.
Yes, we are. So what are some of your favorite films? They don't have to be period dramas, but are there any in particular that are on the top of your list?
Yeah, I am known for liking the Star Wars saga. I would say that I favor it quite a bit. I have my tippity tops, and those are Rogue One, Return of the Jedi, and The Empire Strikes Back, closely followed by Revenge of the Sith.
Perfect
and
taste.
Then, so on and so forth. I find a little love in almost every one of them. I love stories of families. So Star Wars is a big one. Practical Magic is one of my favorite films of all time. And my big guilty pleasure trilogy would be the Back to the Future trilogy.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Those are great
A lot
films.
of different time eras there.
Oh, that's so fun. All right, well then, to follow that up, what are some of your favorite period drama films?
All right. Film-wise, I want to say that my favorite period drama is not entirely a drama. I am a big sucker for Amadeus. I love that film so much, and currently I have two favorite period drama-esque series, and that's Lunanera on Netflix, which deals with Spanish witches, and Harlots, which you can view on Hulu.
I love Harlots so much.
I still haven't seen Harlots, and I really need to. Everyone who listens to this will know I say constantly, I'm so bad at TV. But that is one that has been on my watch list forever.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
really good. My mom and I love watching that one together. So what made you choose Zorro to talk about today on the podcast?
So I grew up with a lot of, as I said, like historical dramas, and my dad was a big fan of like serials, and old westerns and stuff like that. So I had a very healthy blend of storytelling when I was growing up. And I was recently reminded of this particular movie, and how much I watched it as a kid, when there was a tweet about like, who was an actor that you thought was Latin and turned out to not be Latin, and then someone said Antonio Banderas, and I was like, oh man, the Mask of Zorro.
Yes.
So it's definitely that. Also the a huge amount of sword fights, which I'm so excited to talk about. I'm very, you know me in swords.
Yes.
So it's just and this movie is just like such a. For all of, I have my gripes about it, and we will talk about that. But for all of my gripes about it, I really think that it's like a perfect modern action film. And I really thought that it was true to its source. So like, yeah. So that's why I picked it.
I like that. That's a good answer.
Awesome. So then, in terms of what we've been watching lately, I have 2 period films that I've watched recently on Screener that I thought that I should talk about. The first of which is a little film called Dreamland, which is now out, I believe, in limited theaters, and it's now out on VOD as well. It's flown really under the radar to be a new period film starring Margot Robbie.
I didn't know she was in that.
Okay, right? And it
Interesting.
basically is set in Texas during the Dust Bowl, and it's about this young boy, played by Finn Cole, who finds a wanted criminal, Allison Wells, played by Margot Robbie, in his family's barn, and he kind of thinks that she might be his ticket out of town. And it doesn't entirely work. The film has its flaws, but the cinematography is gorgeous, and the way that they did like these Dust Bowl shots I think is really impressive, especially for a film of its size and budget. And of course Margot Robbie is like flawless in it. It's so good. If you are a fan of like Bonnie and Clyde type stuff like I am, then I highly recommend this film. And the other is that I watched Ammonite,
So jealous.
which is the period drama film starring Kate Winslet and Saoirse Ronan that comes out. Well, it's out in some theaters now if you are somewhere that you can actually go to a movie theater, but it'll be out on VOD on December 4th for streaming. And, you know, I will admit I was pretty disappointed by it. Of the 3 lesbian romance period dramas I've seen this year now, it is my 3rd favorite.
Oh no.
Yeah, I
That's
highly
disappointing.
recommend The World to Come when that finally comes in, starring Vanessa Kirby, and I've probably talked about my love for Summerland before.
Yes.
But, you know, Ammonite, it's not a terrible film. It works a lot better as a character study than it does a romance. But also, in terms of historical accuracy, it's taken a lot of liberties, a lot of which I really don't agree with in terms of how it's kind of playing down the strengths and the achievements of the women that it's about. So I'd be really interested if any of our listeners who hear this, if they'd be interested in us maybe early in 2021 doing an episode about it. Let us know if that's something that you would like to hear more about the actual women that it is about. But yeah, that's what I've been watching. I also finished New Girl finally. So it's done. I got through all of it. Quarantine project is over, so if coronavirus could actually go away now, I'm ready to come out of quarantine.
And find yourself a Nick Miller, right?
Exactly. I need to find a Nick Miller. If there is anyone watching who identifies as Nick Miller, hit me up.
I feel like that is a perfect segue into, I don't know, I've watched a lot of things since our last episode, but the only thing that really like classifies itself as period drama adjacent is this little Christmas movie that I have been obsessed with since I think 2017 was the first time I watched it. It's called The Spirit of Christmas. You used to be able to find it on Netflix, and now it's moved over to Hulu. It is about this woman who falls in love with a ghost of a man who died in the 1920s, and he comes back every year for 13 days leading up to Christmas, and they have to work to figure out how he died. And it makes me cry every single time I've watched it. I usually watch it like 4 times every Christmas season because I just love it. And it just makes me all warm and tingly inside. So that is my recommendation if anyone is looking for a Christmas movie and they don't want like the typical Hallmark schmarmy romance. Have ghosts in Christmas. I mean, that's my niche right there.
I'm literally writing this down right now.
It is so good, Nicole.
I also, speaking of Christmas films, I have to say, if anyone is looking for a non-Hallmark Christmas movie, it comes out next week, I believe, at the time of us recording this, but Happiest Season, which is a rom-com with a lesbian romance at the center with Kristen Stewart, Mackenzie Davis, and it's got my favorite man, Victor Garber, as the dad, is genuinely hysterically funny, but also like I almost cried a little bit. It's got Dan Levy in it, and he has like seeing him in this has convinced me that I actually do need to watch Schitt's Creek.
Oh, it's so good.
But I highly recommend that to anyone
it.
who's like looking for a good Christmas movie. It's very unique. And I would never have guessed, like, I love a fake dating situation. Would never have guessed that hiding a relationship could be equally as fun. But it is. So yeah, recommend that one as well.
Speaking of other movies, before we let Catrina talk about what she's been watching, in 2 weeks, so by the time this probably drops, I will have already seen it, but I'm seeing a screening of Red, White, and Blue with John Boyega for the Screen Actors Guild, and he's going to be at it. It's like digital, but still, I'm like super excited about that, and that's set in the 1980s. So I'm really excited about seeing that film.
Oh, that's so exciting.
So Catrina, what have you been watching?
So it's so funny you brought up Schitt's Creek because yes, I also just finished that and it's so delightful and it's not necessarily a period drama, but I would so recommend it for anyone's quarantine watch. I also recently finished The Queen's Gambit, which I absolutely loved. It's such a beautiful character piece, and I didn't think I would like it so much because I went in with a lot of like preconceptions or misconceptions, and I liked it a lot better than I thought I would, and and it's short and easy to digest, and totally recommend.
This is so funny because you literally mentioned the 2 shows that are like next on my list of things to watch. I need to get caught back up on I need to watch The Crown, and then the next like drama I'm gonna go for is The Queen's Gambit. So and Schitt's Creek is gonna be my new comedy. So like now that I feel even more secure in them now that I hear you recommend them. So
yes, absolutely. I'm so glad to add fuel to that fire because they are both so delightful.
And today's episode, as we know, we will be talking about The Mask of Zorro. So I thought as we segue into the main show, I would give a little bit of a backstory on The Mask of Zorro. The film was released in 1998 and was based on Johnston McCulley's character Zorro, which first appeared in 1919. So originally the film was meant to be directed by Mikhail Salomon, along with Sean Connery, who was set to star as Don Diego de la Vega. Connery and Salomon dropped out, and Robert Rodriguez actually stepped into the director's chair and cast Antonio Banderas as Alejandro, having worked with him on Desperado a year earlier. And then Robert dropped out of his role as the director, and the film found Martin Campbell as the director for it. The film stars Antonio Banderas, Anthony Hopkins, Catherine Zeta-Jones, and Stuart Wilson. It was also scored by the late James Horner, who is best known for Titanic, Braveheart, Apollo 13, and hey, Nicole, guess what film he was set to score before his death?
Please tell me it's not a Matt Damon film.
It is The Great Wall, starring Matt Damon and Pedro Pascal.
You know, one of these days we're going to get through an episode without my hatred of Matt Damon coming up, but it's just not, it's not going to happen anytime
Nicole,
soon.
I really want to let you know that will never happen because I have an app set up where I can search every film we do and find the Matt Damon connection.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
Fortunately,
Degrees of Matt Damon.
It's this long, deep-seated dislike.
Okay, the thing is, like, I do dislike Matt Damon mostly because of interviews that I've seen with him, but I also think he's a very inconsistent actor. Like, he's either very good or he's very bad. The Great Wall, I'm looking at you. But it's become like a weird shtick that I have, and like, I guess I just have to go roll with it from here on out. Like,
it's true. I mean, I made you fan art of Matt Damon riding an artichoke, so it's...
You did. I mean, at this point, if I ever met Matt Damon, I'd have to, like, throw hands. Like, I'd be like, you and me, we're fighting it out right here, right now. And he'd be like, who are you?
You're contractually required at this point. You're 12 episodes in.
Exactly.
We're just stuck. But fortunately, The Mask of Zorro does not have Matt Damon in it. So I am really excited to hear Nicole's thoughts on this film.
Yeah, every movie that doesn't have Matt Damon gets like an extra star from me. No, I'm kidding. But the funny thing is, I had watched this movie, I know, as a kid, but I literally didn't remember anything from it other than like the Zorro like sword thing. And so my whole family actually watched it together because I mentioned that I had to watch it. My parents were like, "Oh, we'll watch it with you." So it was very funny to hear like my parents' reactions to it versus my 17-year-old sister's reactions to it. She was like, "What is happening?" She at one point was like, "This kind of reminds me of The Princess Bride, but like not as funny." And I was like, all right, that's fair. I do think it's a fun film. Obviously, they were going for something similar to like Indiana Jones, and I don't think it's quite at that level. I think maybe just not that talented of a director. And I did find the middle section of it to be a little bit boring. But I think it picks back up in the end. So like it's you end on a high note, which is always good. I do kind of wish it leaned a little bit more into being camp because I had so much fun with it whenever it did get sort of campy. And I felt at times that if it had leaned further into it, it actually would have been a more effective film. Because it's kind of like straddling a weird line of like, it is funny, but I'm not always sure it means to be. Obviously, this film has a lot of whitewashing going on. You've got, Antonio Banderas is Spanish and he's playing a Mexican character. It's directed by this white man from New Zealand. Catherine Zeta-Jones and Anthony Hopkins are both of like Welsh ancestry. And I don't know why. My dad was very cracked up because all through it, I just kept being like, she's Welsh. Like, of all the types of white that you could whitewash this film with. Welsh? I also think there's something very fun about the fact that, like, Anthony Hopkins has his British accent. That he's just talking and he's not meant to be British. He's doing his thing. No one else sounds like that, but whatever. It was a different time of movies being made, I think. My sister pointed this out and I thought it was quite funny. She was like, the whole thing with Raphael being in love with Elena's mother and then adopting Elena essentially has some real Sweeney Todd vibes. And I was like, that's actually an excellent point. Like, why is that a trope? But actually, I'm not sure I want to think too hard about like the psychology behind that. So, I also think, like, I don't know. I do think it's a very fun film, but it is one of those movies where, like, maybe you don't want to think too hard about it. Like I said with the accent, the fact that we're supposed to believe that, like, Elena remembers the scent of this flower from when she was, like, a literal baby, I think is pretty funny. And, y'all, there were some choices made with the hair in this film. Some of it's good. Like, Antonio Banderas, he's looking good. There were a few times where I was like,
really good.
Well, there were a few times though that I was like, what was their vision for Anthony Hopkins here? Like, what were they going for? And when they were making the Harry Potter movies, did they purposely want Peter Pettigrew to look like this? There were times where I was like, sir, I need you to put your hair into a ponytail. I'm concerned about you fighting with your hair down like this. I don't know. I was like, choices were made. I think they focused maybe a little hard on Antonio Banderas, making him look real good because he does look real good. Oh yeah, like maybe they thought none of us were going to look at anyone else, which is fair. But overall, like, I do think it's a fun movie. It doesn't hold up entirely, but if anyone's listening somehow and hasn't seen it, I would recommend watching it.
Yeah, I would definitely want to like what is the more pleasant word for piggyback? I'm gonna follow up on your thoughts there. I really honestly, like, I think that I agree that, like, not only should it be more camp, it should really lean into that, like, Central American vibe. I want, like, telenovela style fluff on these dresses. I want longer dance scenes with folklorico, and like, that's the one thing I think could, like, make this more fun for me as someone who is going into this, like, totally expecting the vibes that it gave off. So yeah, I definitely hope, like, if they ever make another Zorro, I hope that A, they put a little more mind into the casting, and B, they just really go for, having fun with the film, which a lot of, like, cinematic adaptations don't like to do these days. I think it was also weird because Zorro is classically, he is a Spaniard. And I thought it was a strange choice to finally have, like, the next generation of Zorro be, like, a Mexican, and still cast a Spaniard for the role. It was a little regressive, and it was kind of interesting. While I was doing my research about this, I found out, along with Sean Connery, Shakira was considered for the role of Elena, and Penelope Cruz as well. Shakira said no, though. I forgot what she was busy with, but she's Shakira, so she was probably busy with that. So yeah, I came for the classic serial action vibes. I got the classic serial action vibes. And I kind of knew what I was entering into. I think it kind of honors, or it completely honors, the source material well, as someone who kind of grew up with Zorro, audio dramas and books and serials. I really like the way that, they honored that, despite any ethical disagreements I had. And then, yeah, I just love, like, little things about this movie, like the dynamics between the characters are beautiful in their hokiness in a way. Like, I love the old, like, tired mentor versus overactive, like, student vibe. And it was nice to, like, Banderas and Hopkins had a really good chemistry together that I kind of wish was played into a little bit more. And then the fight scenes were total chaos, and, like, especially when he was getting his version of Tornado, that was like 6 solid minutes of absolute, like, action chaos that I am so glad I got to live through again.
Oh my gosh, it was so much fun. I remember watching this film as a 6-year-old and just being, like, mind blown by it because there's so much action, like you're talking about. There's just so much. And in particular, I remember that stable scene. And I remember because I was like 6 years old. We had rented this from Blockbuster. My mom really liked Antonio Banderas because we really liked Desperado in this household. And I remember being like, am I allowed to watch this scene? But it's so good. And I forgot that Tony Amendola is in this film. He's, what is it, Don Luis? And I'm actually Facebook friends with him. And I was like, this is so weird to have, like, because he was on another TV show that I knew a lot of the cast from. And so I was just like, this is so weird. Seeing him in this film that I watched, 18 years ago. But, aside from the tremendous amounts of whitewashing in this film, I don't hate it. I think it's a really fun film. I rewatched it again today, and I ended up spending, like, the majority of the film trying to figure out who I would cast as these characters if I was, like, remaking Zorro. We really like coming up with casting lists on this podcast.
Oh, I love that.
And so I came up with Diego Luna playing Alejandro and Eiza Gonzalez playing Elena, like, just like off the top of my head. And I'm like envisioning that, like, a new version of Zorro.
Oh, that would be so sick. I fully approve.
I would be so down for that.
I had Edward James Olmos, I'm sure I'm butchering his last name, as Diego. Olmos.
Yeah.
As Diego de la Vega.
Love it.
I'm just going to picture that forever now.
Yeah, I mean, if you dream it, perhaps it will happen. You just
manifest it, right?
Hard enough, right? Yeah. Yes. Gotta manifest it. Cool, yeah.
So we are going to now dive into some topics about this film. And first up, we have a nice little section about Zorro.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about specifically like the behind the scenes of this particular movie and how it came to be, and how Zorro went into like adaptation phase again, because this led on to the Legend of Zorro, and hopefully more Zorro films in the future that I care to mention. Um, but the concept phase actually lasted a really long time, as you mentioned. It changed hands a lot. Sean Connery ultimately turned down the role of Diego for another movie. And in the original concept phase, Raul Julia, who most people know as Gomez Addams in the 90s adaptation of the Addams Family movies, he was the original Diego that was supposed to be cast, but he unfortunately died before the movie went into production. So the film itself opened to a pretty big blockbuster weekend at $22 million in 1998. And it was followed, unfortunately, by the next 2 weeks by two extremely epic, by 90s standards movies.
Yes.
One of them was an actual epic, Saving Private Ryan, which, you know, you just pack it in when that happens. It's like, oh, well, you know, we did good that first week. The very next week, there's something about Mary debuted. So it was like, all right, well, clean your hands. It was a great movie. It was a fun action flick. But yeah, those were two big 90s hits. So ultimately, it grossed about 25 million globally, with a budget of 95 million. So you can't call it a loss, really.
Mm-mm.
Yeah. Yeah, so let's see. Let's talk about swords, because that's what I'm really here for. I'm really here to talk about swords. So Diego, look at what you did to me. Now I'm ready for Diego Luna as Zorro. So Antonio Banderas is widely known for doing his own stunts in this film, as well as The Legend of Zorro. And he actually trained with Bob Anderson, who is famously known for working with Errol Flynn on several different projects, and also notably choreographed several of Star Wars' most iconic fight scenes. And Anderson called Banderas one of the best swordsmen that he had worked with since Errol Flynn. So that is a pretty high compliment, I would think. So that is also part of who you can credit, part of the team for, you know, behind all of those amazing sword fight scenes, which, you know, are just so beautifully choreographed and so much fun to watch. Speaking of the swords, all of the sword props were forged via aluminum, and so when you hit aluminum swords that are even a little bit like hollow at the base, the sword sound is not necessarily what you'd want, and ADR is usually used in sword fights anyway, but all of these swords sounded terrible to the production team. So all of the sword fights have ADR dubbing on them, unfortunately. And then let's see. During production, Anthony Hopkins and Martin Campbell, who directed the film, both turned down GoldenEye in order to make Zorro, which I think is an interesting choice, because I remember Zorro, and someone's going to hurt me for this, I don't remember GoldenEye. I only remember playing the Nintendo 64 GoldenEye video game. Like, that's
Honestly,
my memory
same.
of GoldenEye. Right? Yeah, like, I don't remember the movie. I know I watched it at some point, but, like, I remember that video game.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to talk about like that mentor-apprentice dynamic really quick. The training scene between Hopkins and Banderas is inspired by Snake and the Eagle's Shadow, which is a 1978 martial arts comedy starring Jackie Chan. It's been paid homage to in more than one movie, including the Matrix trilogy and Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. So I thought that was a pretty cool fact. And then, for my super nerds, I'm sure you guys might like this as well. Bob Kane, who created Batman, credits a lot of his conception to the character of Zorro. And I thought about that a lot, especially like in the very beginning when Hopkins was coming up from his little cave out from the fireplace, from that hidden door to go hang out with his daughter. So yeah, I was like, oh, that's very Batman-esque. Oh yeah, I remember Bob Kane said this. And so yeah, that's how we got that.
Changes everything.
Right? Like he Hopkins' Zorro is a little rich. So yeah.
When we were coming up with the topics for this episode, Nicole decided to give me the Mexican War of Independence. First and foremost, I would like to apologize, just like I had to in our Marie Antoinette episode. I am terrible at foreign languages. I swear, hand on my heart, that I have a letter from a doctor that says that foreign languages and Maggie do not get along. So I apologize in advance for any pronunciation errors I make. Admittedly, I do not know a lot about the Mexican War of Independence, so I really enjoyed getting the opportunity to really dive into this area of history. That's one of the things I love about choosing these different movies. I get the opportunity to research and learn something new every single time. I will say that I don't think that Spain's colonization tactics are talked about nearly the same way as the rest of Europe, particularly Britain, is discussed in history. So it was really quite eye-opening to do this research. As we know, The Mask of Zorro is set in 1821, which is at the very end of the 11-year war for independence. So I figured, since that is a fairly large amount of time, that I would just give a brief overview of the two key players. So the war started September 16th, 1810, when a Catholic priest named Miguel Hidalgo y Castilla read the revolutionary tract Cry of Dolores, which called for the end of Spain's 300-year rule in Mexico. Historians have never been able to agree on a clear consensus of when Father Hidalgo got the idea for Mexican independence from Spain, but his army of supporters eventually grew past 60,000 people. These included the disenfranchised poor, fellow priests, noblemen, and so many others. Hidalgo was eventually charged with 12 charges that were brought against him by the court of the Inquisition. Because he was a priest, he had to be stripped of his clerical orders before he could be tried for insurrection against the crown. He was executed by decapitation in 1811 with 4 of his other co-conspirators, and their heads were mounted on the 4 corners of the Alcaldía de Granadista in Guanajuato City. He is quoted to have said at his execution, "Though I may die, I shall be remembered forever. You all will soon be forgotten," which I thought was very powerful. And then jumping to the end of the War for Mexican Independence, Agustin de Iturbide is another key figure. Augustine actually fought against the insurrectionists from 1810 to 1820 before he decided to change sides, mostly because he realized if Spain was overthrown, he could become the king of Mexico. He negotiated the Treaty of Cordoba, which declared independence, and Mexico's independence was declared on Augustine's birthday on September 27th, 1821. He essentially finessed his way into the title of Constitutional Emperor of Mexico. So, we have to respect the effort there. Mm-hmm. I just thought his story was so fascinating. He also is the man who invented the flag for Mexico. Spain really didn't get the picture and tried to reconquer Mexico several times between 1821 and 1829 before they eventually recognized their independence in 1836. Mexico is planning a commemoration for their 200 years of independence in 2021, bearing COVID restrictions. So that is my brief overview of the beginning and the end of the war.
I want to interject here and say that I'm very happy that you are making the effort to say these words and that you shouldn't be too self-conscious about the way you say them.
Thank you.
Because
I've listened to so many YouTube videos. I'm going to try to phonetically figure out how to say these names.
As a bilingual person, I have mispronounced names in front of my grandmother so many times. And so I have learned what true judgment feels like when you speak Spanish.
Oh, gosh.
So I'm very like, whatever, like as long as people are making an effort.
Thank you. I was so nervous.
No, not at all. You did great.
Well, now it's my turn to potentially kill
You've
some
got
names.
this.
So something that I was really interested in was that in the film, Alejandro Murrieta, Antonio Banderas' character, is the brother of Joaquin Murrieta, who is this legendary Mexican outlaw. And then whenever I was looking at kind of where Zorro comes from, because, you know, there's this long tradition of stories about Zorro far before this film was ever made, I discovered that the character of Zorro was actually based on this legendary outlaw Joaquin Murrieta, which there's something very weird about that, I think, actually, that, like, the inspiration for Zorro is actually in the film about Zorro, but it's not Zorro. I was like, this is getting hard to keep track of. But I found, the more that I looked at Joaquin Murrieta, the more interesting I found him, because there's actually still some ongoing debate about whether or not he was a real person.
Mhm.
Some historians think that he was real. Some historians think that he was a real guy, but he didn't do any of these things that are like attributed to him. And some people say that he never actually existed and he was just a legend. Um, but a lot of what is thought to be known about him comes actually from this book that came out in 1854 by John Roland Ridge called The Life and Adventures of Joaquin Murrieta, the Celebrated California Bandit. And this book actually then later inspired Johnston McCulley in 1919 when he created his character of Don Diego de la Vega, Zorro. And there are documents that show a horse thief by that name in 1852. And there were actually a bunch of bandits at this time named Joaquin, which is kind of weird, but okay. Joaquin Murrieta has been called the Robin Hood of the West or the Robin Hood of El Dorado. So everything that I say about him, know that you need to take it with a grain of salt because there is this question of whether or not it's actually all true. But general consensus is he was born around 1829 in Sonora, Mexico. It's never more obvious that I took French all through school than whenever I try and say Spanish names. But Joaquin and his brother and his stepbrothers and his brothers-in-law and his cousins moved to California in around 1849 as part of the gold rush, and he was accompanied by his young new wife, Rosa Feliz. And so in 1850, the government in California actually passed this act, essentially trying to force Mexicans back out of California. And Joaquin was a gold miner at the time, and he was a pacifist, but he met with a lot of he met with a lot of prejudice in these mining towns from these white miners. And so he and his brother were falsely accused of stealing a mule, and supposedly it's after that they sought revenge, maybe. His brother ends up getting hanged. His brother's not named Alejandro, for the record. That's worth noting, I think. Joaquin gets like horsewhipped, and his wife is assaulted. In some versions of the story, she's killed. And so then he goes on to hunt down these white men who had raped his wife, and he kills them, according to the legend. Eventually, he's got a whole bunch of crimes that are attributed to him. He's known for killing both Chinese and white American miners, stealing horses, holding people up, and he's becomes a wanted criminal in California. I do think it's kind of funny that, like, even as he's on, he is this wanted criminal, they're still not really sure if he's real or not. But he is amongst the 5 Joaquins, and like that's like a capitalized thing, like the 5 Joaquins on a bill in 1853 that hired the California Rangers, which were veterans of the Mexican-American War, to hunt down these 5 men named Joaquin and their associates. And they're all named specifically who they are, but they're kind of like, I guess, bring in anyone who's a bandit. And
bring me anyone named Joaquin.
Right, like Joaquin Phoenix, watch out. But a California state ranger named Harry Love, who is called Harrison Love in the film, that small change just really cracks me up, did claim to have killed him in 1853. In the film, it's shown as happening in like 1841. They wanted to speed it up, I guess. And he does bring in a head that he claims to belong to Murrieta in a jar. He also kills one of Murrieta's associates, a man who was known as Three-Fingered Jack, but who was actually Mexican and whose real name was Manuel Garcia. And he cut off this man's hand to say, look, I have killed Three-Fingered Jack. You can see he has 3 fingers on this hand I have brought you. Y'all, white men are a different species, truly. They're like, to prove I killed him, I brought you his head. Why would that prove anything to me? I wasn't even sure if he was real 5 minutes ago. Like, how does that prove which Joaquin this is? But Harry Lee does preserve the head in a jar of alcohol, and he brings it to claim his reward, because they've got, a reward on his head. So this jar is put on display throughout California. 17 different people sign a thing to confirm that it's Murrieta's head, including a Catholic priest. And they continue toting it around, charging money to see it. It's like a weird attraction. And it's eventually destroyed in the fires that followed the 1906 San Francisco earthquake. But I was telling this to my sister, and she was like, so you mean if it hadn't been for those fires, they'd still be charging people money to see it today? And I was like...
So wait, that's like 50 years.
Apparently, I don't know. I guess pickling a head works.
It does, but yikes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, big
what
yikes.
Kind of alcohol did he use? Asking for a friend.
Yeah. I'm like, to be fair, to me, it does feel like if you put like a head into Everclear, it would probably do something strong to it. So,
yeah.
Don't try this at home.
Yeah. And I don't think you'll get away with charging admission to it today. I'll probably just get arrested. But the fun thing is, though, even though, Harry Love rolls up with his head in a jar, some people are still like, no, that's not Joaquin. Supposedly his sister later is like, yeah, that wasn't him. But then one of his cousins is like, no, it was. It's very confusing, but...
Well, I'm sure at that point he had like a weird bloated alcohol...
Right,
face.
exactly. Like, what can you really tell from it? Like,
exactly.
At a certain point, it's like, well, yes, I can tell that was a man once. Maybe. But there are these supposed sightings of him middle-aged later on. And so the myth sort of lives on. And so, obviously, all of this is to say, I can't tell you what of all that I just said is true and what is false, what is just legend versus what is, what actually happened. But what is clear is that it's definitely something different than what we see in the film, but you can sort of see where the character of Zorro is inspired by this vigilant sort of person who starts doing all of these things because he has been wronged by these white men who have come to California. It kind of goes along with, a lot of a lot of things in history are sparked because white men did something wrong.
Yep.
That's a running theme. But I just thought that this was really fascinating, and we have this podcast, which means that when Maggie and I like a topic, we can just talk about it for a long time. So if anybody has any thoughts on that, I would love if anybody has other versions of him that they've seen. I know he shows up all over music and TV shows and books and stories. And I would really like to read or to watch some more of those things. So if anyone listening has a favorite and knows anything about him, please do let me know, because I'm fascinated.
We do love a good Robin Hood story.
We really do.
Absolutely.
And I do just want to submit for the record that this is now the second time Nicole has chosen a topic that involves beheading.
Listen, Just wait. One of these days I'll talk about Anne Boleyn too. So.
Oh, yes. Wait, it was 3 times. It was like 3 October episodes and this one. Okay, I'm noticing a trend.
Oh,
And now
glad to help bring it back.
right? And then to segue to a much nicer topic than heads and jars, I'm going to talk about costumes. Unsurprisingly, it is quite difficult to find interviews about the costume design for this film because it was 1998. And unfortunately, most of my favorite historical drama bloggers have not talked about this film in terms of costumes, which was a little disappointed. But I did find, I think it was New York Times article from like 1990, I think it was 1999. And it was an interview with the costume designer Graciela Mazon, who also did the costumes on one of my favorite movies, Robert Rodriguez's From Dusk Till Dawn. So I have this feeling like once I learned that Robert had been attached to this film, initially I was like, oh, he must have hired her as well. And then she just stayed on because she's also worked on Spy Kids and a couple of his other films. I think also Desperado. Extremely talented costume designer. When she was working on Zorro, she searched all the libraries and the museums to study period portraits, including work from Mexican painter Miguel Cabrera and Ignacio Maria Murrieta. She also tried to steer clear of Hollywood's previous Zorro incarnations. Some of them had not been very flattering, and so she tried to really steer away from those versions. She also had all of the costumes made in Mexico, which I thought was really awesome. She used all Mexican craftsmen from around the country to do the embroidery and to do the leather tooling. She also consulted with specialists in the country for the silver for the buttons and the jewelry and the finer details on the costumes. And then in the scene, I thought this was really fascinating. In the scene where Elena loses her dress and her corset and the camisole during the duel scene, was very much like stage magic. And as somebody who's worked in like theater as well as film, it was really cool to see like very practical effects used to get this moment. So the garments were cut beforehand and then gently taped and stitched with a clear plastic thread. And then off camera, Mazan would pull on the threads with 2 other special effects people, and they would pull the threads to release them, causing her clothes to fall to the ground. And it worked on the very first take.
Oh, wow.
Which I was just
That's
like
really
mind
cool.
blown. But yeah, that's basically all that I was able to find about the costumes. I wish I could have delved into them a little bit deeper, because this show is truly so beautiful. The jacket that Alejandro wears is one of my favorites. It's about like halfway through. And then at the dance scene, of course, that dress that she wears is just like insanely gorgeous. And his outfit is beautiful as well. So it's a visually stunning movie. But like you said, Catrina, there's so much more they could have done with the fluff and the frills to really sell that aesthetic. But so are there any final thoughts on this film?
I would like a new Zorro movie. I don't often ask for franchises, even as a Star Wars fan. I'm actually like really kind of excited about this break we're having from
Me
these
too.
Star Wars movies. Yeah, it's kind of giving me a breather. But yeah, there's so much room for a new Zorro movie, especially with a take like this, where it is a Spaniard Zorro passing the baton on to Central American Mexican Zorro. And gosh, I can't get Diego Luna.
Right?
Zorro
And his
out of my
hair,
head now.
it's a perfect, I'm like, I'm going to start petitioning for this.
Please, like, let me please work on this film. So I really, you know what? I think the people are ready for a new Zorro movie. That's my take on this.
If you want to like get on working on that script right now, like
yeah, let's go. Let's go.
Let's do it. We're going to start right now.
Yeah, right now. Let's work on it.
Hey, right in time for the 200-year anniversary of Mexican independence next year. There you go.
Exactly.
We need a new Zorro.
Yeah, we'll have our script treatment ready. It'll be fantastic.
Perfect.
Actual Mexican people will get
yes.
Yeah.
Well, this has been awesome.
Yeah, thank you guys so much.
Absolutely. Thank you to everyone for listening to our 12th episode of Petticoats and Poppies, History Girls at the Movies. And a huge thank you to Catrina for guesting on this episode. It's been so great having you here.
Yes.
Yeah, likewise. I've had so much fun with you two.
Thank you. We'd love to hear from our listeners on social media and hear what you think about The Mask of Zorro. We'd also love for you to send us any films that you would love for us to review in the future.
You can find us on social media at HGATM Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You can find Maggie over at Maggie of the Town, and you can find me at Nicole Ackman 16. Katrina, where can they find you on social media?
You can find me anywhere on the internet if you look for Oh Catrina. That's OHCATRINA. And yeah, that's about it. And check out my podcast, Ito Banta También, where we talk about pop culture from a Latinx point of view.
Yes, it is an awesome podcast and everyone should listen to it.
Thank you.
And you can listen to our podcast, of course, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and on the Earglue Media website. If you like what you hear, don't forget to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or over on Podchaser if you're not on iTunes. Every other episode, we will be reading our podcast reviews, so be sure to leave us one if you would like to be featured.
We'll be back with another exciting episode as we continue to look at period films from a history and film perspective. And we are going to have one more Friendsgiving episode. So get excited for that and our next guest. This episode's been great. Thank you again to Catrina. And until we see you guys next time, stay safe and healthy.
You've been listening to Petticoats and Poppies.
History Girls at the Movies.
What kind of alcohol did he use? Asking for a friend.